You're watching the Ruslan Belov channel. If this is your first time here, subscribe right now and make sure to hit the bell. YouTube actively suppresses channels like this one in search results and recommendations, and the only reliable way to get our episodes without interruption is through notifications. Your like and subscription matter more than you might think. So today is May 20th, 2026, and it's been a packed day, both on the front line and well beyond it. Zaporizhzhia direction, evacuations and counter-offensive. Let's start with Zaporizhzhia, or rather with everything that's unfolding there simultaneously on multiple levels right now. The local administration of Zaporizhzhia Oblast has officially announced the evacuation of residents from two settlements, Novoalexandrivka and Novomikhailivka. Geographically, these villages sit on completely different sections of the front. Novoalexandrivka is located just north of the Konska River and the village of Hrihorivka, that's the western Zaporizhzhia sector. Novomikhailivka is west of Pokrovska and Velika Mikhailivka, the northern Zaporizhzhia direction. Two different points on the map, but the same underlying logic. These are precisely the sectors where Russian forces are either actively advancing or pushing toward Kharkiv or directly toward the city of Zaporizhzhia. It's also worth recalling that a partial evacuation was announced several weeks ago for two other settlements, Nikopol and Marhanets. Both are located in close proximity to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The distance from these evacuation zones to the nuclear facility is around 14 kilometers. That's not an abstract figure, it's a potential damage radius in the event of any serious incident at the plant. Now to the most significant development on this direction, the AFU counter-offensive in the area of Stepnohirsk and Kamyansk. Over the past 24 hours, Ukrainian forces again improved their positions, and based on the current map configuration, one conclusion is hard to avoid. Russian forces have lost confident control over Stepnohirsk. Positions there are still being held. Russian units retain significant presence in the area, but the trend is clear, and it is not in the defenders' favor. If we look at the dynamics since May 1st, 2026, the picture is quite telling. 20 days ago, Ukrainian forces were only just making contact with the enemy on this sector. Over those 3 weeks, the AFU has methodically recaptured a number of settlements, entered the northern part of Stepnohirsk, built up a sufficient concentration of units there, and now appears to be preparing for a further push southward toward Kamyansk. And here is the most critical question. Where does this offensive stop? Because when you zoom out on the operational map, the next strategic objective after Kamyansk is Vasilivka. And Vasilivka is a key node on the supply routes running from Melitopol and Tokmak. The M18 and T30 roads run through it. Without control of Vasilivka, any advance toward Enerhodar and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant loses its logistical rationale entirely. In other words, what's happening today on the western Zaporizhzhia sector is not a set of local skirmishes over nameless villages. This is, in all likelihood, the opening phase of preparation for an operation of an entirely different scale. It cannot be ruled out that in 2026, Ukrainian forces will genuinely attempt to reach the perimeter of the ZNPP, both from the Nikopol and Marhanets side and through Vasilivka from the west. Does Russian command understand this? Almost certainly, which is precisely why, on the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction, around Huliaipoli, Verkhnya Tersa, Vozdvizhivka, Russian forces continue to press, attempting to create a flank threat and tie down Ukrainian reserves. But the pace there is considerably slower. Map adjustments are minimal, a few hundred meters west of Huliaipol at most. As for the evacuation from Novomikhailivka, another conclusion suggests itself here. Ukrainian command appears to be preparing to move additional forces into the northern Zaporizhzhia direction. Their task, to hold the front line from Novomikhailivka through Kharkiv to Yurkivka and Tavriske, preventing Russian units from reaching the approaches to Zaporizhzhia itself. It's a defensive logic, but it's being constructed on top of offensive action, which in itself tells you that Ukrainian command is currently playing on several boards at once. Kostyantynivka. The front is collapsing. Moving on to the Kostyantynivka sector, the situation there over the past 24 hours continues to deteriorate. And it's doing so at a fairly rapid pace. New adjustments are being recorded to the northeast of Kostyantynivka itself. Looking at the dynamics of the past several days, it is fair to say that the front line in the vicinity of the city is effectively disintegrating. Russian units are advancing, and according to several credible analysts and mappers, there is now a real possibility that several local pockets have formed, with Ukrainian units encircled inside them. The first potential pocket is in the southern part of Kostyantynivka, in the Promyslovyi district. The second is on the stretch between Podilska and Chervone, that is, already to the southwest of Chasiv Yar. The data has not yet been confirmed by objective control footage, and that caveat matters. But the number of independent sources converging on the same picture is now large enough to take the information seriously. A reminder of the broader context. Ukrainian command and Zelensky personally refuse categorically to withdraw troops from the Sloviansk-Kostyantynivka direction, even as holding it becomes increasingly difficult. Meanwhile, a significant portion of Western analysts and military experts are now openly stating that the conflict on Ukrainian territory will not end with the fall of Kostyantynivka. On the contrary, that event will trigger the next phase. It is no coincidence that Western media over recent days have been actively circulating reports that the Russian side is already working through plans for the so-called post-Donetsk period of the conflict. And it is in that context, not as a routine diplomatic visit, that Putin's trip to China should be understood. This is about aligning positions with Beijing for the next post-Donetsk stage, not about current tactics. Vovchansk-Kharkiv direction. Volokhovka taken, Kharkiv is next. On the Kharkiv direction, a fresh confirmation from official sources. The Russian Ministry of Defense, together with the northern grouping of forces, yesterday officially reported the full establishment of control over the settlement of Volokhovka. Objective control footage has been published and verified. Today, analysts have already begun making the first adjustments around the perimeter of the next settlement, Kharkiv. Judging by the pace at which Russian forces have been moving on this sector following the capture of Volokhovka, there appears to be no intention to pause before Kharkiv. Either confirmed map adjustments will emerge in the next day or two, or, and this is an entirely plausible scenario, an official report from the northern grouping on the capture of the settlement will come directly without prior announcement. Over recent weeks, the grouping has been operating in exactly this fashion. No advance announcement of ongoing fighting, results reported after the fact. Sumy direction, fighting in Zaporizhzhia. Briefly on the Sumy direction, heavy fighting around the settlement of Zaporizhzhia has been ongoing for several days. According to incoming reports, forward Russian units have managed to establish a foothold within the settlement's built-up area. Exact localization has not yet been confirmed. Objective control footage has not been published. Awaiting confirmation, an official report from the northern grouping on this sector is also likely to follow in the near term. Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, a deadlock that costs billions. Now we move to the Middle East, and the picture there is no less tense than on the Ukrainian fronts. A quick recap for those who haven't been following closely. The conflict began on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel struck a series of Iranian military targets. In the course of those strikes, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. Tehran responded by closing the Strait of Hormuz, the critical artery of global oil and liquefied natural gas trade. Before the war, roughly 3,000 vessels passed through this narrow corridor every month, carrying around a quarter of the world's seaborne oil and 20% of global LNG. Traffic now stands at approximately 5% of pre-war levels. The number speaks for itself. Since March 19th, the United States has been running an aerial campaign against Iranian naval targets in the Strait. Since April 13th, a naval blockade of Iranian ports has been in effect, creating what amounts to a dual blockade. Iran has shut the strait to Western shipping. Washington has blockaded the sea approaches to Iranian ports. A deadlock. On the diplomatic track, the situation is no better. In April, Pakistan brokered a 2-week ceasefire conditional on reopening the strait to commercial shipping. The first round of direct talks took place in Islamabad on April 11-12 and ended without result. Iran subsequently transmitted its own peace plan through Pakistan, 14 points, including US payment of reparations to Tehran, withdrawal of American forces from the Iranian periphery, lifting of all sanctions, unfreezing of Iranian foreign assets, and, crucially, recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz and the creation of a new mechanism for navigation through it. By all accounts, Trump was openly dissatisfied with this proposal. Following the breakdown of talks, US media reported that the administration is seriously considering a long-term blockade of Iran as an alternative to resuming bombardments or exiting the conflict. The White House regards both of the latter options as too risky, politically and reputationally. Meanwhile, on May 7th, an incident occurred that illustrates just how fragile even the current low-intensity situation remains. US forces recorded attacks by Iranian assets on 3 American Navy destroyers transiting the Strait. The attacks were intercepted, and the US struck Iranian military facilities responsible for the attack in retaliation. In practice, active hostilities have not ceased for a single day. On May 12th, Iran stated 5 conditions for resuming negotiations: a halt to the war on all fronts, lifting of sanctions, unfreezing of assets, compensation for damages, and, once again, recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. That last point is a red line for Washington. Recognizing Iranian control over a waterway through which a quarter of the world's oil passes is not a diplomatic concession. It is a strategic defeat. As of today, the strait is de facto closed. Iran officially maintains it is open to all except US and Israeli-linked vessels, but hundreds of commercial ships, including Indian ones, remain at anchor, unwilling to enter the conflict zone. Global oil and gas prices remain elevated, which, it's worth noting, works rather well for the Russian federal budget. Something of an unplanned windfall for Moscow in the current geopolitical environment. US domestic politics, impeachment on the horizon. Back to Washington, where 2 events today look, at first glance, like routine bureaucratic procedure. But read more carefully, they signal something considerably more serious. First, the US Senate passed a resolution restricting the president's military authority to resume hostilities in the Middle East without congressional authorization. It's important to understand that this is a resolution, not a law. The path to becoming law is long: the full Congress, then the president's desk, a veto, and only with 2/3 of both chambers can that veto be overridden. In practice, given the current political configuration, that scenario is extremely unlikely. But the significance is not whether the resolution passes. The significance is that it exists at all. It means the Republican camp has fractured on the Iran question. A portion of Trump's own party members openly voted to limit his authority. That is an intra-party signal, and the president has undoubtedly read it. The second development is even more ambiguous. The US Department of Justice today introduced an open-ended prohibition on any tax audits of the sitting president, his companies, and his family members. In practice, this means the entirety of Trump's financial activity is removed from oversight by tax authorities for an indefinite period. The parallel here is hard to miss. In late 2024, after Biden lost the presidential election, he signed a pardon for his son Hunter, framed broadly enough to close off an entire spectrum of potential criminal charges. Biden understood that with Trump coming in, prosecution of his family was inevitable. So he used the last window available. Today's Department of Justice decision follows the same logic, only in mirror image. The president is closing off his tax flank preemptively, and this indirectly suggests that Trump is either receiving serious signals about a potential impeachment process or is himself considering that scenario and preparing for it in advance. Any impeachment process is invariably accompanied by financial investigations, and it is precisely that channel that appears to have been blocked today. We're watching closely. The situation is moving fast, on the front lines and in the corridors of power alike. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. It genuinely matters because your views, likes, and subscriptions are what keep this channel alive against the algorithm. Hit the like button if this was useful and subscribe if you haven't already. Take care. See you in the next episode.